Who we are, who we were, and who we're destined to become are all reflections of the stories we tell, of gods and devils from tales of the heart to those of fear and foreboding. Stories shape us and the world we live in. Myths, folk tales, and even religious parables all define our cultures and beliefs. In each episode of Faith and Fear, we will dip our toes into the comparative narratives spanning the globe, considering the concepts and archetypes common to us all. Enle, Shalom, and Prazir. Hello and peace. It's a pleasure. Thanks for following me down the rabbit hole once again on my journey to better understand the stories and beliefs that shape us. Believe in love. Believe in magic. Hell, believe in Santa Claus. Believe in others. Believe in yourself. Believe in your dreams. If you don't, who will? John Bon Jovi. This week, I want to dig a little deeper on some things that may hit close to home for some of you. I want to discuss matters of religion and spirituality, specifically ritual and spiritual practices, or what some choose to call magic. The thing is, magic is one of those words that immediately sparks a mental image for those who hear it. For some, it may be of boy wizards or epic quests involving dragons. For others, it may be thoughts of video and role-playing games. Then there are those, perhaps not as common today, who think curses, witchcraft, and devil worship, which couldn't be further from the truth. Magic, often spelled with a C and a K, in order to distinguish it from media interpretations and parlor tricks. Its occult definition is the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will. This sounds vague and non-specific, but that's likely part of the point. This view of magic involves using different means, often ritual, to influence the outcome you desire, literally enacting your will upon the universe. Ritual, in this sense, is a specific order of activities that can involve gestures, singing, speaking specific words, incorporating specific objects including candles, ritual tools, and giving offerings. All of these are usually determined by the traditions of the practitioner's religion or community, narrowed even further by the intent of the ritual. But ritual, like magic, is one of those loaded words that can mean different things to different people, instilling comfort or igniting fear. The truth is, we all practice little rituals throughout our daily lives, performing a little magic, enacting our will upon the world around us. As an American citizen, one of the rights I value the most is the freedom of religion. However, for many, that sometimes feels like it's a right more in theory than actual practice. Don't get me wrong, things could be far worse than they are and have been in the past. But for some, depending on where they live and the tolerance of the community, this freedom is in fact still very limited. But I digress. I'm not here to harp on the sliding scale of our individual freedoms, except that historically speaking, there does seem to be a pervasive trend towards the demonization and sometimes even fetishization of ethnic practices and beliefs. I'm referring to traditional folk practices of indigenous Americans, those from Asia, South America, and all of those born of the African diaspora. I'm also talking about traditional practices in folk magic from old Europe as well. Practitioners have often been ostracized, sometimes experiencing violence even fairly recently, only for the same practices to be viewed as entertaining in our media. The thing is, as I've already said, magic and ritual, whatever you choose to call them, takes many forms and is a part of almost every belief system in some manner. Before I go further, I want to make it clear that I'm not intending to be disrespectful or antagonistic in any way. My intent is to look at these practices objectively and discuss the similarities in order to promote understanding and tolerance. The Christian, Judaic, and Islamic faiths generally view magic as negative and even satanic. However, they too have ritual practices. Catholicism has many rituals, most of which fall under the sacraments of the Catholic Church: baptism, Holy Communion, the sacrament of penance, anointing of the sick, the holy orders, and matrimony, all of which are believed to be very powerful and very sacred rituals meant to serve as signs of God's presence, as well as the channels through which practitioners may receive His grace. Though other denominations of Christianity may not have the same practices, most have their own, often similar rituals. A huge part of devout Jewish practice is the daily prayers performed 3 times a day, a fourth being added on sacred days such as Shabbat, Saturday, their day of rest, and the Jewish holidays, each holiday, of course, having its own specific rituals. Then there are the high holy days, life cycle events, as well as the laws of ritual and family purity. In Islam, there are the 5 pillars, or the 5 core beliefs. These refer to testimony, the creed of Islam, recited under oath, prayer performed ritually 5 times a day, charity performed actively, fasting performed during the month of Ramadan, and the mandatory Islamic pilgrimage. I know that these are not believed to be magic systems by devotees, but to those who embrace magic for what it is, there is little difference beyond semantics. Spiritual practices and rituals serve to connect the practitioner with the higher power of their faith. Granted, that faith differs between belief systems as greatly as the perceptions of magic. Still, there are certain branches of Judeo-Christian and Islamic faiths that choose to embrace the concepts of ritual and ceremonial magic. The first among these I want to discuss is Kabbalah, or Jewish mysticism. The tradition focuses on the essence of God, and by using a set of teachings intended to explain the relationship between the infinite God and the mortal, finite universe, practitioners hope to gain a greater connection to the Creator through true knowledge and understanding. One adaptation of Kabbalah is Western mysticism, also referred to as ceremonial magic. The tradition was made popular by groups like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, performing complicated and elaborate ceremonies. They incorporated practices of Kabbalah as well as Enochian, angelic magic, believing themselves to be dealing with spirits and interacting with the higher planes. In Islam, Sufism is the mystical practice, much like Jewish Kabbalah, dedicated to establishing a direct personal experience of God. Sufis have typically formed orders who trace their doctrine through a succession of teachers back to Muhammad. Moving on from monotheistic religions, we have witchcraft and paganism, a complicated mixed bag of new and old traditions. Modern practices include rituals and beliefs from various cultures, though there are some more specific systems who claim to be the true forms of the craft. First, I want to talk about Wicca. Wicca is the name of a neo-pagan religion inspired by Western esotericism and drawing from ancient pagan concepts. It is a belief system heavily oriented towards nature and acknowledging not only the male but the female aspects of divinity. It is split into a number of denominations with no central structure or leadership. However, each individual tradition has a hierarchy and set of practices that are variants of the core beliefs. Wiccan rituals and celebrations are generally focused around the cycles of nature the phases of the moon, and the movement of the sun. For most, not all, magic is a huge part of their spiritual practice. Typically speaking, many Wiccans believe that magic is both a science, art, and an actual law of nature that modern science is still learning to comprehend. The difference between what we view as magic and what we consider to be science is a matter of perspective determined by our level of understanding. Moving forward, two of the proclaimed true traditions of Wicca and witchcraft, both requiring initiation, are the Gardnerian and Alexandrian traditions. Gardnerian Wicca was developed by Gerald Gardner, who, viewed as the father of Wicca, claimed to have been initiated and trained by another, much older coven. Gardner would use those teachings to start his own, training new witches and high priestesses who would go on to found their own covens and train their own initiates, expanding the growth of Wicca. Gardnerians are dualistic, celebrating both a goddess and a god. Their tradition practices secrecy, forbidding members from sharing information with anyone uninitiated. Alexandrian witchcraft, founded by Alexanders, dubbed the King of Witches, is heavily influenced by Gardnerian Wicca, the tradition in which Sanders was trained. The biggest differences are that Alexandrian Wicca tends to be more eclectic, incorporating not only Wiccan practices, but ceremonial magic and Kabbalah as well, focusing heavily on gender polarity. Lastly, I want to discuss modern paganism, or neo-paganism, as it is typically called. This system is somewhat more complicated, as it occasionally is used as an umbrella term. Neo-paganism, much like Wicca, draws from historical pre-Christian ideology. Practitioners do not share a core set of beliefs, rituals, observances, or texts, and can be extremely eclectic. Pagan faith generally incorporates polytheism, the belief in multiple gods and goddesses, animism, the belief that all things, animate and inanimate, possess a spiritual essence, as well as the perspective that all things are connected in some way. Pagans also typically have a great veneration and connection to the divinity of nature. Their rituals can take place in both public and private, with the focus usually being on altering their mental state and level of awareness. Normal methods for this can include meditation, chanting, drumming, and focused visualization. Some pagans do believe in practicing magic and ritual, while others choose to simply honor their deities or nature itself. Basically, pagans are not always Wiccans, Wiccans are not always witches, and witches are not always pagans. Broken down, Wicca and paganism are both considered spiritual belief systems, while witchcraft is considered an actual practice. There's so much more I want to cover on this subject that, for the sake of keeping things relatively short, I've decided to split this episode into a two-parter. If you've reached this point, thank you for sticking with me. Like I said earlier, my intent with this discussion was not to be disrespectful or antagonistic in any way. There are so many different beliefs and perspectives in this world. I feel it's important that we take a moment to consider objectively how truly similar they are at their core. By focusing on these similarities instead of their differences, I believe we may reach some greater level of tolerance and understanding. Next week, we will continue with part 2 of this discussion, where we will be covering shamanism, voodoo, brujeria, and more. For now, assalamu alaikum and namaste. Peace be with you until we meet again. Thanks for listening to me as I've nerded out about stories and beliefs. Join me next week as I journey down the rabbit hole once again by subscribing and listening wherever podcasts are available. Who knows? Maybe then we'll be one step closer to glimpsing the true nature of faith and fear. Music for this podcast is brought to you by Delo 1954X and Toby Lane from Pixabay.com.